My name is Krishna-krpa Das. I'm a disciple of Satsripa Das Goswami from New York State. And I'm happy to be back at the lotus feet of Radha Govinda, where I joined this movement 42 years ago. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Karoti Karmani Krita Avataraha Yani Atmatantraha Bhagavan Triyadishaha Yata Sasarja Agre Idam Riha Samstapya Vritim Jagataha Vidate Karoti Karmani Kritavataro Yanyatma Tantra Bhagavan Stradisha Tasa Sadaga Yadam Niriha Samstapya Vritim Jagato Vidade Karoti Karmani Kritavataro Yanyatma Tantra Bhagavan Stradisha Tasa Sadaga Idam Niriha Samstapya Vritim Jagato Vidate Karoti Karmani Kritavataro Yanyatma Tantra Bhagavan Stradisha Tasa Sadaga Idam Niriha Samstapya Vritim Jagato Vidhate. Please chant. Karoti Karmani Kritavataro Yanyatma Tantra Bhagavan Stradisha Tasa Sadaga Idam Niriha Samstapya Vritim Jagato Vidate Karoti Karmani Kritavataro Yanyatma Tantra Bhagavan Stradisha Tasa Sadaga Idam Niriha Samstapya Vritim Jagato Vidate
Karoti Karmani Kritavataro
Karoti Karmani Kritavataro
Yanyatma Tantro Bhagavan Striyadishaha
Yanyatma Tantra Bhagavan Stradisha
Yathasa Sarjagra Idam Niriha
Tasa Sadaga Idam Niriha
Samstapya Vrittim Jagato Vidatte
Samstapya Vritim Jagato Vidate
Karoti Karmani Kritavataro
Karoti Karmani Kritavataro
Yanyatma Tantro Bhagavan Stradishaha
Yanyatma Tantra Bhagavan Stradisha
Yatasa Sarjagra Idam Niriha
Tasa Sadaga Idam Niriha
Samstapya Vrittim Jagato Vidatte
Samstapya Vritim Jagato Vidate. Any of the ladies want to chant? Karoti Karmani Kritavataro Yanyatma Tantra Bhagavan Striyadisha Samstapya Vritim Jagato Vidate Karoti Karmani Kritavataro Jnana-tantro Bhagavan Striyadisha Hitata Sajaga Idam Nariha Samstapya Vritim Jagato Vidate Karoti does them. Karmani transcendental activities. Krita by accepting. Avatarha incarnations. Yani all those. Atmatantraha self-independent. Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead. Triyadishaha, the Lord of the three worlds. Yatha, as much as. Sasarja, created. Agre, at first. Idam, this cosmic manifestation. Niriha, although desirous less. Samstapya, by establishing. Vritim, means of livelihood. Jagataha, of the universes. Vedate, as he regulates. So here, Vidura is speaking to the great sage Maitreya. O great sage, kindly narrate how the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the independent, desireless Lord of the three worlds and the controller of all energies, accepts incarnations and creates the cosmic manifestation with perfectly arranged regular principles for its maintenance. Please repeat. O great sage, kindly narrate how the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the independent, desireless Lord of the three worlds and the controller of all energies, accepts incarnations and creates the cosmic manifestation with perfectly arranged regular principles for its maintenance. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada. Lord Krishna is the original personality of Godhead, from whom the three creative incarnations, namely the Purusha avatars, Karananavaisai Vishnu, Garbhodakasai Vishnu, and Kshirodakasai Vishnu, expand. The whole cosmic creation is conducted by the three Purushas in successive stages under the external energy of the Lord, and thus the material nature is controlled by Him. Thinking material nature to be independent is like seeking milk from the nipple-like bags on the neck of a goat. The Lord is independent and desireless. He does not create the material world for His own satisfaction, as we create our household affairs to fulfill our material desires. Actually, the material world is created for the illusory enjoyment of the conditioned souls who have been against the transcendental service of the Lord since time immemorial. But the material universes are full in themselves. There's no scarcity for maintenance in the material world. Because of their poor fund of knowledge, the materialists are disturbed when there is an apparent increase of population on the earth. Whenever there is a living being on the earth, however, his subsistence is immediately arranged by the Lord. The other species of living entities who far outnumber human society are never disturbed for maintenance. They are never seen dying of starvation. It is only human society that is disturbed about the food situation, and to cover up the real fact of administrative mismanagement, takes shelter in the plea that the population is excessively increasing. If there's any scarcity in the world, it is the scarcity of God consciousness. Otherwise, by the grace of the Lord, there is no scarcity of anything. Another amazing purport by Srila Prabhupada with lots of wonderful points. Om Jnana Timarandasya Gyananjana Shlakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmaya Shri Gurave Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Smriti Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharini Nivase Shrunivani Pastatya Adhishtani Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakalpatubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyascha Paritanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So we'll try to elaborate on some of the different points that Srila Prabhupada made in his purport. So this is a section where Vidura is basically telling Maitreya the different kinds of Krishna-krpa he wants to hear about. And he begins by talking about the creation of the material world. And in the course of these questions, he briefly describes how the material world is created from the Vedic version, and he wants Maitreya to give a lot more details. So Prabhupada starts out explaining that Lord Krishna is avatari. He is the source of all the other avatars, namely the avatars associated with the creation, Karananavashaya Vishnu, who is the Mahavishnu, or the Vishnu who resides on the Karana ocean. Karana means cause, the causal ocean. And he's basically the Lord of all universes. He's the Lord from which all the universes emanate from the body of. And then the next one is Garbhodakshaya Vishnu. So basically all these Vishnus are lying on different oceans, and they're named by the oceans they're lying on. Shaya means lying, Garbhodaka means the Garbhodaka ocean. So so each individual universe has a Garbhodakshaya Vishnu in it. And sometimes they associate the different planetary systems with different bodily features of the Lord. The Patala Loka being his feet, and the Satya Loka being the top of his head. And then, so he is the Lord of this universe, and then within this universe, in the hearts of the living entities, the Lord expands still further as Kshirodakshaya Vishnu, and he's also within each universe in a region called Svetadvip, lying on the ocean of milk, Kshirodakshaya Vishnu. So, although the Lord could manifest the universes in any way he chooses, this is how he chooses to expand himself into these different Vishnus who each play a role. So then, the next point Prabhupada makes is that the material energy is controlled by these Vishnus, and that it's foolish to think that it's acting independently. So the big verse that people quote in that connection is Mayadakshena prakriti suyate sachratram hetananane konteya jagatmi parivartate, which is 9:10. It says, the material nature, which is one of my energies, is working under my direction, O son of Kunti, producing all moving and non-moving beings. Under its rule, this manifestation is created and annihilated again and again. So everything is going on, the material nature is acting under the superintendence of Krishna. And the material scientists, they can't understand that because basically Krishna points out that a person in knowledge is in knowledge of three things: the material nature, the spiritual nature, and the controller of both. So the materialistic scientists, they only know about the material nature, and they only know a little bit about the material nature because the material nature is endless. But they don't know about the spiritual nature, and they don't know about the Lord, who's the controller of both. So they're actually, and the spiritual nature and the Lord are more important than the material nature, because we can live perfectly happy without any association with the material nature at all, as we do in the spiritual world. It's only because we've been addicted to material sense gratification for many, many, many lives that we have an intimate relationship with the material energy. But actually that relationship is illusory. We actually have no relationship with material energy. But because we're rebellious, the material energy is acting on us. And when we end our rebellion, then Krishna calls off the material energy. That's described as Daivesha Gunamai Mama Maya Dharatya Mamevaye Prabhadyante Mayamitam Tarantite. This threefold energy, the material energy, is very difficult to overcome, but it's easily overcome by one who surrenders to Krishna. So we're very fortunate to have this knowledge because we're harassed endlessly by the material nature at every moment. The Vedic sages and the Supreme Lord himself are very expert in delineating the different miseries of material existence. They describe them as the threefold miseries and the fourfold miseries. So the threefold miseries are miseries caused by the body and mind, and miseries caused by other living entities, and miseries caused by the demigods. And the fourfold miseries are mentioned in Bhagavad Gita 13:9. Janma mrityu jara vyadi dukkha doshana darshana. Krishna says a wise man understands the faultiness, the dosha. He sees the faultiness, dosha darshana, of janma, birth, mrityu, death, jara, old age, and vyadi, disease. So our position is that although we're eternal spiritual souls, as we learn in chapter 2 of Bhagavad Gita, we're subjected to this material energy, as Prabhupada mentions in the purport, due to our rebellion since time immemorial against the service of the Lord. So another point that Prabhupada mentions in the purport is the material universes are full in themselves. Everything's complete. There's a nice verse in that connection in the beginning of the Ishopanishad. Om Purnamada Purnam Idam Purnam Udachate Purnasya Purnam Araya Purnam Eva Vashishate. Actually, when I was a bhakta in 1979 on 55th Street, they would chant every morning the entire Ishopanishad, all 18 verses, including the invocation. So this is a nice verse that describes how the Supreme Personality of God is perfect and complete, and because He's completely perfect, all emanations from Him, such as this phenomenal world, are perfectly equipped as complete wholes. Whatever is produced of the complete whole is also complete in itself. Because He is the complete whole, even though so many complete units emanate from Him, He remains the complete balance. So the idea is everything that's needed for the living entities to survive is already provided in this material world by the Supreme Lord. There isn't anything that has to be gained from outside, and everything that's needed is actually here, and therefore therefore, Prabhupada said there's no scarcity for maintenance in the material world. And he makes the point that the animals are surviving very nicely, but there's always a problem with scarcity in human society due to mismanagement. And the mismanagers blame it on the overpopulation when it's actually due to their mismanagement. Like, some things they do is like, because they don't want the price of grain to go too low, they throw the grain into the ocean instead of actually giving it to people who could benefit by it, because it costs them more money to do that. So there's all kinds of craziness goes on. So sometimes we wonder how we're going to survive in this material world. There's a nice Leela actually where the Narada Muni, he converted a hunter to Krishna consciousness, and he asked him how he could become free from his sinful reactions, which Narada had showed him. He gave him a darshan of all his future suffering, and he freaked out and said, what can I do, Narada, to get out of this? And Narada first told him to break his bow and give up the hunting business. And he said, how will I survive? And Narada said, don't worry, I'll take care of you. So Prabhupada says in the purport, it wasn't that Narada had a special program for taking care of this hunter, but rather he knew that Krishna has a program to take care of every living being, and if you change your job from being a hunter to being a saint, he'll definitely provide for you. And there's different purports in the Gita, like where Prabhupada says that the devotee, he doesn't have to worry about how to maintain body and soul together, that Krishna will see to that. And that wasn't just theoretical knowledge, that was how Prabhupada lived. Basically his whole focus was how to translate the Bhagavatam and come to the West and spread Krishna consciousness. He didn't have a program for economic development. He just depended on Krishna. Somehow or other, Krishna always gave him enough clothes to wear, and some place to stay, and enough food to eat. But his whole thought was how to spread Krishna consciousness. And actually, Srila Prabhupada needed thousands of people to help him, and he needed millions of dollars. But what was his program for getting thousands of people to help him and getting millions of dollars? His program was to chant Hare Krishna and to give classes on Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, and Chaitanya Charitamrita. And if he met some favorable people, try to sell him a few sets of books that he brought over from India. And lo and behold, Krishna provided everything he needed to spread this movement all over the world without any assistance from his contemporaries, who one might expect might have helped him out a bit. So Prabhupada demonstrates in his whole life actually how you can depend on Krishna and Krishna will come through. So, the reason why there's human society doesn't always seem to get what human society needs in terms of maintenance, in terms of food and water, there's droughts and there's famines, is because they don't go about it the right way. Krishna explains how to go about it the right way in the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. There's a whole section on sacrifice, beginning with the most famous verse in the chapter, Yagnar tat kamanonyam chalopiyam karabandha tadarpam aprikonteam mukta sangasamatra. Work done as sacrifice for Vishnu has to be performed. Otherwise, work causes bondage in this material world. Therefore, O son of Kunti, perform your prescribed duties for his satisfaction, and this way you'll always be free from bondage. So he talks a little bit more about sacrifice in the upcoming verses, the next 7 verses. In the beginning of creation, the Lord of all creatures sent forth generations of men and demigods, along with sacrifices for Vishnu, and blessed them by saying, "Be thou happy by this yajna sacrifice, because by its performance will bestow upon you everything desirable for living happily and achieving liberation. So actually the reason for the scarcity is there's a scarcity of sacrifices. People are in ignorance of the fact that the Lord is behind everything, arranging everything, and that if they don't perform sacrifice, then they won't get the necessities of life. So that's one of the things that the Hare Krishna movement is meant to teach human society, that everybody, not just a few people want to attain Krishna-krpa, but every man, woman, and child in human society should be performing sacrifice for the pleasure of Lord Vishnu. In this way they can live very happily in this world and attain liberation. So he continues, demigods pleased by sacrifice will also please you, and by cooperation between men and demigods, prosperity will reign for all. In charge of the various necessities of life, the demigods, being satisfied by the performance of yajna, sacrifice, will supply all necessities to you. But he who enjoys such gifts without offering them to the demigods in return is certainly a thief. The devotees of the Lord are released from all kinds of sins because they eat food which is offered first for sacrifice. Others who prepare food for personal sense enjoyment barely eat only sins. So this is another thing that we learn in the Hare Krishna movement, that before we eat something, we should offer it to Krishna. Because actually, it's Krishna's. It's actually not ours. And we're part and parcel of Krishna. We're meant to be rendering service to Krishna. So we're meant to be offering everything in the material world for the pleasure of Krishna. So, and if we do that, then there's no karma from killing the different plants that are involved in preparing the food. And not only that, the plants who sacrifice themselves for the meals we provide to Krishna, they make positive spiritual benefit. So not when we're involved with preparing prasadam, we're actually not only purifying ourselves, but we're actually benefiting all the living entities whose bodies we're offering, all the vegetation, whose bodies we're offering to Krishna, and even the people, the farmers who planted that vegetation and maintain it, they also get some benefit because they're engaged in performing sacrifice. So this is, actually we're doing a lot to purify the planet just by offering food to Krishna. And he continues, all living bodies subsist on food grains which are produced from rains. Rains are produced by performance of yajna, sacrifice. Yajna is born with prescribed duties. So, and this is a very practical thing. Actually, 3 times Srila Prabhupada visited Hyderabad in South India, and coincidentally every time he went there was a drought. And because he did all these programs with the chanting of Hare Krishna and talking about the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, the drought disappeared, it went away, finished. They even mentioned it in the newspaper. Swami Bhaktivedanta ends drought. So these things aren't just like theoretical ideas, and you can actually see evidence for it. And then he continues, regulated activities are performed in the Vedas. The Vedas are directly manifested from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Consequently, the all-pervading transcendence is eternally situated in acts of sacrifice. So we can perceive Krishna by a performance of sacrifice. The sacrifice of devotional service reveals the presence of Krishna. Krishna is present everywhere. Just like in this room, there's many radio waves in this room. And there's maybe some music on one station, the news is on another, the weather is on another. But we can't perceive it, although it's present. But if we had a radio, we could turn into a certain frequency and we could actually experience that. So the super soul is present everywhere. But the common people, they don't know how to tune into the super soul. But by performing devotional service, we tune into the Super Soul and we can perceive His presence. We can get direct guidance from the Super Soul. Tesham satati yuktanam bhajatam pratipurvakam dadamani buddhi yogam tam yena mami yanmamu piyantite. Those who are constantly devoted to serving me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. The materialists, they can't understand how the Super Soul is present everywhere, but by the performance of devotional service, the devotee gets enlightenment from the Super Soul, who gives him clues how to spiritualize his life. And the final verse on sacrifice, 3:16. My dear Arjuna, one who does not follow in human life the cycle for sacrifice, thus established by the Vedas, certainly leads a life full of sin, living only for the satisfaction of the senses. Such a person lives in vain. There's another verse later on, and actually in this chapter also. Let me just scroll down, and I think it's 31. That's in the next chapter. There's another verse that talks about sacrifice. It talks about how you can't live happily in this world or in the next, unless you perform sacrifice. So sacrifice is so important, and Prabhupada says in one of these purports here in chapter 3 about performing sacrifice. It's in the tail end of one of the purports. Actually, unfortunately, I guessed right. It's in the tail end of the purport to 3:10. I just read the tail end of the purport. The Lord created this material world to enable the conditioned souls to learn how to perform yajna sacrifices for the satisfaction of Vishnu, so that while in the material world they can live very comfortably without anxiety, and after finish the present material body, they can enter into the kingdom of God. That is the whole program for the conditioned soul. By performance of yajna, the conditioned souls gradually become Krishna conscious and become godly in all respects. In the age of Kali, the Sankirtan Yajna, the chanting of the names of God, is recommended by the Vedic scriptures. And this was a transcendental system introduced by Lord Chaitanya for the deliverance of all men in this age. Sankirtan Yajna and Krishna consciousness go well together. The Lord Krishna, in his devotional form as Lord Chaitanya, is mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 11, Chapter 5, Text 32, as follows, with special reference to the Sankirtan Yajna. Krishnavarnam Trisha Krishnam Sangha Pangastra Parshadam Yagnai Sankirtana Prayar Yajantihi Sumedsa. In this age of Kali, people who are endowed with sufficient intelligence will worship the Lord, who is accompanied by his associates by performance of Sankirtan Yajna. All other yajnas prescribed in the Vedic literatures are not easy to perform in the age of Kali, but the Sankirtan Yajna is easy and sublime for all purposes. As recommended also in Bhagavad Gita 9:14. So he doesn't quote 9:14, but 9:14 is an important verse because sometimes people ask us if this is this chanting of Hare Krishna that you're doing for hours every day, is it supported by the Vedic literature? Actually, there was somebody was complaining about the chanting, and when professor, challenged Srila Prabhupada, I don't see where this chanting that you're emphasizing so much is recommended in Bhagavad Gita. Srila Prabhupada wrote him back, saying, I think you missed one verse. Satatam kirtayantam, always chanting my glories. So it continues, always chanting my glories, endeavoring with great determination, bowing down before me. These great souls perpetually worship me with devotion. So about that Sankirtan Yagya, in where it's mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam, 4 verses after it's mentioned in connection with the appearance of Lord Chaitanya, there's another nice verse. It goes, Kalim sabha jayantyaya gunagya sarabhagina yatra sankirtane naiva sarva sarta vilabhite. Those who are actually advanced in knowledge are able to appreciate the essential value of this age of Kali. So on the surface, it looks like Kali Yuga is so bad that it doesn't have anything going for it. But the people are actually in knowledge. They actually worship Kali Yuga. Such enlightened persons worship Kali Yuga. Because in this fallen age, all perfection of life can easily be achieved by the performance of Sankirtan. Therefore, Lord Chaitanya highly recommended Sankirtan. There's a nice verse in the Adi Lila. So Lord Chaitanya, he's chanting the holy name and he's like shivering and tears are flowing from his eyes and he's wondering, what the heck's going on? I'm just chanting this mantra and my guru gave me and all these strange things are happening. So he inquires from his guru and his guru is very happy. Oh, you've attained love of God. Thank you so much. And then he gives him one instruction. Nacha Gaya Bhakta Sanghe Kara Sankirtan Krishna-nama Upadeshi Tara Sarvajan. So this is Ishvara Puri, the Guru of Lord Chaitanya, telling him, my dear child, continue dancing, chanting, and performing Sankirtan in association with devotees. Furthermore, go out and preach the value of chanting Krishna Nam. For by this process, you will be able to deliver all fallen souls. Actually, once after the great teacher of Mayavadi sannyasis, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, he became a Vaishnava. He actually inquired from Lord Chaitanya of what are the items of devotional service is the most valuable. Lord Chaitanya immediately answered, Nama Sankirtan. Later on, that's Madhya 6, 241. Later on, in the Antya Lila, Lord Chaitanya, he was describing Sanat Goswami, the 9 items of devotional service, Nava Vida Bhakti, the ones that Prahlad mentions, Srindatam, Shravana Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, etc. And these are the most powerful forms of devotional service because they can easily give one Krishna Prema. But out of all these 9, the most important is Nam Sankirtan. So that's how we perform yaga in this age, and we find that the Lord provides whatever we need. As it said, Ananya Chintayanto Mamye Jana Paripaste Teshane Yuktanam Yogashema Bahamyan. One who fixes his mind on the worship of Krishna, Krishna carries what one lacks and preserves what one has. So those are a few thoughts on the different points that Srila Prabhupada made in the purport of this verse from Srimad Bhagavatam. Does anybody have any questions or comments about the verse, the purport, or the attempt to lecture on the subject. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for your class, Prabhu. You mentioned many things, but one of the things which I was thinking about is you mentioned that the world is full of mysteries and the threefold mysteries. Body, other living entities, and demigods. But then he said there's also a fourth category, fourfold mysteries. And the fourth one is disease, old age, I don't know these things, birth, death, or
Yeah.
the fourth one is caused by the body. So I didn't get the fourth one because I thought yes, Atmika
Yeah.
causes the disease and
Right.
the birth and that's why it's a threefold mystery. So maybe you can explain.
Well, it's an interesting point that there's an overlap between the threefold and fourfold miseries. Because if you take birth, then you're subject to the threefold miseries, and that the miseries, they all pertain to the body, really. And what's interesting is that the material miseries of the living entity are superfluous to him. There's a nice verse that goes, Anarta pashamam shakshad bhakti yogam hochate lokasya janato vidvangs chakra satvara sanghitam. The miseries of the living entity which are superfluous to him, the material miseries of the living entity which are superfluous to him can be directly mitigated by the linking process of devotional service. And therefore the learned Vyasadeva has compiled this literature, Srimad Bhagavatam, which is in relation to the Supreme Truth. And the idea is that the more we absorb ourselves in the devotional service of the Lord, the more we identify ourselves as souls, and the miseries of the body, they become lessened. This is a point that's made by Lord Kapila in his teachings. He talks about how the sages, because they're absorbed in thought of the pastimes of the Supreme Lord, they transcend the material miseries. But because the living entities, they don't know about the transcendental pastimes of the Lord, they just absorb themselves in their body and their mind in this world. They're subjected to these. So it's a test how advanced we are in devotional service, how disturbed we are by the threefold miseries. And the advanced devotees are undisturbed, right? The advanced devotees, they see the change of body like a change of clothes, right? So, I mean, like there's that sage named Didichi, right? The demigods heard from Lord Vishnu that they could produce a weapon from his bones, right? So they approached the sage and asked him for his bones, and he jogged around with them a little bit, but then he gave his bones to them in charity because he was that detached, you know? So we're not really on that level that we're willing to part with our bones. But in the Nectar of Devotion, there's a statement where Lord Shiva is talking to his wife, and he's saying that a person situated in Krishna-krpa, he doesn't even experience the miseries associated with material body. So the more we're addicted to sense gratification, the more the material miseries will seem real. And the more we're absorbed in the devotional service of the Lord, the more they will seem unreal. And so if you're tired of suffering, all you have to do is increase your absorption in the devotional service of the Lord. And when you're completely absorbed in the devotional service of the Lord, you won't suffer anymore. And actually Krishna makes that point in Bhagavad Gita, a nice verse which I can quote when I'm not so tired as I am today. Unfortunately, I remember the number of it. So. It's nice. It's actually 3 verses together, and sometimes I try to use them to sell the Bhagavad Gita, because everyone's looking for happiness. And in the stage of perfection called trance or samadhi, one's mind is completely restrained from mental activities by the practice of yoga. This perfection is characterized by one's ability to see the self by the pure mind and to relish and rejoice in the self. In that joyous state, one is situated in boundless, transcendental happiness, realized through transcendental senses. Established thus, one never departs from the truth, and upon gaining this, he thinks there is no greater gain. Being situated in such a position, one is never shaken, even in the midst of greatest difficulty. This indeed is actual freedom from all miseries arising from material contact. So, according to Krishna, when you attain samadhi, there's no more misery. There's another point Krishna makes also, another ecstatic verse in Bhagavad Gita. I think it's 14:20. 14:20. Nobody quotes it, but it's a great verse. Guna netana tita trin dehi deya samudbhavan Shanma mrityu jara dukhair vimuktom mritam ashnute. When the embodied being is able to transcend these 3 modes associated with the material body, he can become free from birth, death, old age, and their distresses, and can enjoy nectar even in this life. So the question, of course, is how do we transcend these 3 modes of nature? And that's answered in verse 26 of this chapter. Mamachayo vyabhicharina bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samatichaitan brahmabhuya kalpate. By engaging in unbroken devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances, one can immediately transcend the 3 modes of material nature and attain Brahman, the spiritual plane. But does anybody have any questions or comments or realizations about these relishable transcendental points made in the wonderful Vedic literatures the Lord has kindly provided us with through the medium of his empowered representative, Srila Prabhupada? Yes, sir.
Well, I was just thinking, why is it that Krishna does, kind of from the verse we're hearing about how Krishna is in charge of everything, the Adisha, and so he's not obligated to take incarnation, he's not obligated
Yeah, it's a lila. Yeah.
maintain the worlds, but it's also that he's desireless, so he doesn't necessarily have a specific selfish desire to fulfill in doing so. He's not obligated, he doesn't have to, but he also doesn't have a personal aspiration in one sense. So the question is, why does he do it? And I feel like it's related to his devotees, right?
Well, it's like, why do parents build playgrounds for their kids? So they can have some place to play. So we have these desires, right? that are incompatible with residence in the spiritual world. So he has to create some place for us to play. But because he knows, because we're part and parcel of himself, nothing is enjoyable for us as having an intimate relationship of transcendental love with him in the spiritual world. So he put some miserable features in his playground. So we might inquire, isn't there a better place we could be than here? Actually, one can argue that all the miseries of the material world are simply meant to motivate the living entity to inquire about self-realization. And if we're not doing that as a result of the miseries, then we're suffering in vain, actually. Suffering is meant to wake us up. So we inquire, because he wants to give us a chance to fulfill our desires, but at the same time he wants us to realize that our desires are really small time, and nothing that we can dream up in the material world, nothing that's enjoyed by the 8,400,000 species of life is worth enjoying. Only the nectar of pure devotional service, which we read about in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Krishna-krpa and the nectar of devotion, is really worth relishing. Nectar of devotion describes there's three kinds of happiness. There's material happiness. Better than that is the happiness of realizing one's identity with spirit. But higher than that is the nectar of rendering service to the Supreme Person. So he has two reasons. One, to give us a place to enact our illusory conceptions of life. Just like we have Halloween, everyone can dress up however they like for one day. And then the other is to get frustrated with our plan of illusory enjoyment and turn back from being the bird who eats the fruits of the tree to look at our friend who's full of transcendental pleasure and enjoy a rasa with him. So, it's actually 8:59. By the grace of the Lord, I thought of enough things to say to fill up the whole hour. Praise the Lord. Thank you for your time. We'll end here. It's Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada Ki, Sri Radha Govinda Ki, Samveda Bhaktivedanta Ki, Gaur. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare